This is a video about being a parent, about being a Christian parent. And this is about how do we raise our children to know God, and how do we raise them so that they really know God. We know that the general outcome, maybe not in all countries, but in certain countries, the general outcome right now is that people somehow think their children are going to turn out in a certain way, and their children don't turn out that way. Many parents, most parents, a large majority of parents have to be honest and realize that their kids are not going to automatically turn out to love God, and that most parents who don't realize this, a lot of kids these days, they are turning out to not care about God, turning out to not believe in Jesus, turning out much different than their parents had anticipated, or wanted, or even expected. And there are reasons for that. It's not, the thing that I learned about parenting is that it's essentially like discipling. And with discipling, you can't force an outcome. And you could have all the plans and all the efforts and all the projects and activities, or all these different things, but you can't really force an outcome. And I think the central thing I learned about discipling was that it has to be begun with realizing that it's Holy Spirit who's doing the discipling, not us. Because ultimately, especially with children, and this applies with adults too, everyone has their own will and everyone has their own decision making. And it's like if you have a piece of string and you can't push the string, because if you try to push the string, it just bunches up and it doesn't go anywhere. And that's why I came to this realization. Two things about discipleship. One is that it's bigger than I realized, that the goal of discipleship is perfection. And it's much bigger than I realized. And the other is that it's not me or anyone who's doing the discipling, that a person is not discipling another person, that it's Holy Spirit who is doing the discipling. And then that also applies, I think, with our children. That is to recognize it's not primarily us who is forming and shaping our children, that it's Holy Spirit. And we have to take that approach. So, at various times, we did different things in our family to help that be the case. A couple of things were, one of them was we would spend time as a family together, not talking, just in Holy Spirit's presence, and we would just sit there, and I would explain that we're having Holy Spirit and He's living in us, but we don't know Him, and so we ought to spend time to know Him. That's where you get to know someone, as you spend time with. So I would explain this to our kids, and we would just sit there on the couch in the morning, and we would sit there every day for 10 minutes or whatever. We just sit there. And so our kids, I felt like that was something concrete that could be done to help our kids understand that it was Holy Spirit who is really the one controlling our lives and shaping our lives and bringing the spiritual things into our lives. And it wasn't just words, because we took the action of spending time and we did it every day. And so in that time that we spent, something was happening, and it was the case that Holy Spirit was coming in and taking control of their lives, I think, because essentially what it is with kids is we're not going to be there at the crucial moments. When they're tempted, when someone's offering them something, or they're sitting around late at night with their friends and whatever, or they hit one obstacle and then they get disappointed and then battered, and then they're at this point of making some decision. We're not going to be there necessarily. And so I recognize that's the right strategy, is it can't depend on us, because we're not going to be there at that crucial moment, but Holy Spirit will be. So developing their relationship with Holy Spirit, that's the highest priority. Among the highest priorities, of course, they have to have an understanding of salvation. They have to have accepted Jesus and the cross, and they have to submit themselves to God. All of these things. But the discipleship and the training and the learning and the growing process, that was something that I recognized in order to really succeed, with the variables of children, that it had to be Holy Spirit. Along those lines, one of the things that we did early on and did consistently for years was every time the kids went to sleep, I would anoint them with oil. And I would, take oil, pour it on my palm, and as they're sleeping, I would anoint them on their head with oil, and I would pray for them. And I would sit there and pray for them until I felt the presence of God. So it wasn't just like a rote thing where I just said, and then just left. I would anoint them with oil, and I would pray for them until I felt God's presence. And I think that had some important effect, because you can really, especially consistent prayer that is prayed until achieving a result, not just casual prayer that's just uttered up, but like consistent, I guess you could call it prevailing prayer, because you're not quitting until you reach some result. And I would pray for them until I felt the presence of God, and then I would stop. And they would wake up and they would have oil on their forehead, and they used to complain about their hair being oily, but I didn't care. So, and they knew I didn't care, because they knew there were higher priorities, right? And so, that's like a general lesson about kids is, face the fact that words don't matter in a larger sense. It's what we do. And so how we live, if we're serving God, if we're reading the Bible, if we're prioritizing worship, if we're really praying, all those things, what we actually do, that's what gets in to them. And that's what they care about, and ultimately, and it's sort of like, I was talking to someone just today, it's sort of like, Hiro, our son, went to Japanese school when he was very young, and so even though his grammar and his vocabulary and some things are not totally developed, and extensive, as sophisticated as they could be, deep inside of him, he has an understanding of the Japanese language. And it's deep, natural in him. And so I think that's the primary job with our kids, is when they're very, very young, to instill inside of them this spiritual understanding of God, and this deep awareness of His reality and His presence and His all encompassingness, and also a fear of God too at that time. And so those are some just basic starting points.